So the Astra Militarum, also known as the Imperial Guard, are the hammer-blow force of the Emperor. The uncounted billions of mortal human soldiers who make war against a galaxy of aliens and demons with little more than a humble lasgun, a trusty bayonet, and a suspiciously optimistic copy of the infantryman's uplifting primer. It can be a hard life in the Imperial Guard. Many raw recruits may have an expected lifespan of minutes when they're first deployed into the combat zone, and even the experienced veterans are going to have a hard time when they're going up against millennia-old superhumans all covered in spikes. Of course, in the Imperium, quantity is a quality all of its own. If in doubt, throw more men at it, and the experience of the average soldier doesn't exactly factor in too hard to the generals who are sat at the back fighting their war of attrition. You might have just as much to fear from the supposed allies fighting alongside you as you do the enemy. Even if you survive the conflicts, then the outlook might not be looking too rosy if you've seen some things that really the Imperium would rather you didn't. Your average guardsman will be equipped with the easily produced flak armour and the trusty lasgun, certainly not famed to be the most feared weapon of Warhammer 40k. The troops refer to them affectionately as flashlights, and on a tabletop they share strength and AP characteristic with weapons such as the mighty Grot Blaster. However, if I read my primer accurately, the faith of a single guardsman is all it takes to conquer worlds and cast Xenos armies into the abyss, so lasgun or no, I'm sure you'll be fine. Admittedly, the guardsmen don't have it all against them on the tabletop though. Ever since Games Workshop decided to hand them out a rule called Born Soldiers, where you get to auto-wound the enemy on 6s, arguably the standard lasgun has been far stronger than the standard bolter for the Space Marines. It seems the humble guardsman gets the win against the superhuman Space Marine at the moment, particularly against hard targets. Must have some Astartes scratching their heads and why they're bothering to fire these mini rocket projectiles at all. To collect an army of Imperial Guardsmen in Warhammer 40k, you might need a bit of disposable income on hand. Imperial Guard being the army of quantity does kinda mean that you might need a lot of them. If you're going for an infantry-heavy force, you might be playing with a fairly spectacular number of models, though that doesn't stop Games Workshop selling them at £30 per 10. Fortunately, rules-wise, Games Workshop has you covered with a swanky new Imperial Guard Codex, a book that's been hotly anticipated by the long-suffering fans of the Imperial Guard for a good 5 years or so now, one of the first codexes of 8th edition, yet somehow they decided it would be one of the last codexes of 9th. Good to know we'll get a good 5 months or so worth of play out of our shiny new book. At least in 10th edition it'll still have the pretty pictures. Getting into the units for the Imperial Guard, and sitting at the top of the tree are the officers. You can tell them apart because they're the men in the fancy hats. The officers of the Guard harness the latent power that's available to the human psyche via the sheer power of shouting. It seems that if you yell at your men to move, you'll enable your men to move at a speed that's more normally seen by jump infantry and chaos bikers. Of course though, that's not the real one to fear, as every enemy of the Emperor well knows. You don't want to get in the way of them when the guardsmen are ordered to commit to combat. It's a phalanx of demonic knights rampaging their way towards your army. In that case, it's time to fix bayonets. The ranks of the guardsmen are also bolstered by some sanctioned Abhumans. It's a pretty simple life for an ogre amongst the ranks of the Imperial Guard. Eat your rations, break some spiky chaos boys, but try and avoid going into a dark and scary chimera at all costs unless the Commissar makes you. Meanwhile, sniper support can be found from the ranks of the Ratlings. Fresh back from taking the One Ring to Mordor, these little halflings now specialise in taking down your opponent's commanders. They'll always seem to have got their hands on the best rations when yours have mysteriously gone missing. Perhaps the workhorses of the Guard really are their armoured vehicles though. The mighty but lumpy Lehman Russ really does show that somewhere between World War I and World War II, tank design really peaked for humanity, and the correct way to drive one about is to wave your sword out at the top, just in case the enemy comes within bashing distance. Given that it's Warhammer 40k though, that's probably not actually the worst move. When a standard Lehman Russ isn't quite enough though, then you can deploy the mighty Baneblade. This enormous thing is a pure Imperial Guard power trip, harnessing energy from the Dawn of War series, and any heretics and traitors that you manage to miss with the Baneblade cannon and the Demolisher won't feel quite so clever after they've wound up under its adamantium tracks. Other than tanks though, the Imperial Guard are perhaps just as famed for their artillery. The mighty Basilisks and Manticores can bring down some steel rain on their enemies. Weirdly a unit that should probably almost never appear on the tabletop, as it should be several miles behind the lines. I guess that's the issue with trying to fit the narrative of the battle within a 6x4 feet space. Finally, to encourage all your forces forward, we've got the tender administrations of the Commissars. It could really make you rethink your life choices with retreating, if you're scared of the bloke that stood behind you, just a little bit more than the orc knobs with power claws charging down your position. The Imperial Guard are well known to have drastically different fighting styles across the galaxy, and perhaps one of the most notable are the Cadian shock troops. Steadfast, well-drilled and well-equipped guardsmen, their planet's entire populace is assigned a rank at birth, and they did a great job holding the Eye of Terror at bay with the Cadian Gate until unfortunate things happened with a Blackstone Fortress. It seemed that not even the legendary command abilities of Ursarkar Krieg were quite enough to save them this time. Perhaps GW finally realising that they had to give Mr. Abaddon a win, after Krieg and his Space Marine mates had sent him packing 12 times over. Poor old Krieg wound up in the collection of Trazyn the Infinite, so I guess there's always the chance for him to be returned to us somewhere down the line. Until then though, I guess he's pokeballed. It does seem that the Cadians get the lion's share of the love from Games Workshop these days. Lots more models, plus the models that they do have seem to have superior rules to some of the other things, and I kind of feel that the widely popularised fluff of other regiments copying them and their fighting style might just be a bit of an excuse for not having other models for the other metal regiments. The Cadians certainly can pack a punch these days though. It seems that Games Workshop weren't just keen to leave the leagues of Votann with 6s to hit getting 6s to auto wound, and it can mean that their Catachan can do some pretty silly things with hotshot lasguns and mortal wounds. Besides the Cadians, there's the muscle-bound Rambos of the Catachan jungle fighters. When a normal day on your homeworld has the plants as well as the animals trying to take a big bite out of you, I guess most battles seem like a walk in the park. It means that they're kind of refreshingly practical within the 41st millennium, and rail against imperial bureaucracy a bit. Their commissars are known to meet with some happy accidents if they try and be a bit too draconian. The Catachans maybe aren't faring quite as well in terms of recent models as the Cadians. Their foot troops hail from the turn of the century, and I guess the designers really didn't want you to miss the fact that they're muscly. I'm perhaps not too surprised that they decided to make them as strong as a Space Marine in their previous regimental trait. Definitely a unit that could do with a bit of an update though, particularly when GW have proved that they can do some nice Catachan models when they want to, but only seem to like releasing them as individual one-off set pieces. Perhaps the most famous son of Catachan though is Sly Marbo, the guy who's Rambo so much that his name is an anagram of it. Catachan Action Man likes to ruin entire formations with blade, pistol and hidden explosive, and if he's trapped on the same world as a huge enemy army, then really they're trapped with him. Plus of course he's an absolutely great motivational speaker. The Death Corps of Krieg are perhaps one of the other most famous Guard regiments. These dour gas mask equipped soldiers have a fairly brutal existence. Having fought a brutal war of attrition to reclaim their home world from treachery, they now believe it's their ultimate duty to die for the Emperor. You have to keep a close eye on them on the battlefield, as maybe bravery isn't exactly the right word for this, it's just maybe not being entirely fussed about the whole living thing. People do seem to really love the World War I gas mask wearing and dour duty aesthetic of the Krieg, but as well as taking a heavy toll on their enemies, they may all take a heavy toll on your wallet as well, as in the grim darkness of the far future, Forge World prices are about the worst of the lot. 5 horses for $150 anyone. Still though, the Krieg are pretty awesome. You certainly don't want to be an unlucky enemy of the Empire within shovel range if one of them decides to pick up his entrenching tool. The number of Imperial Guardsmen defending the Emperor though are in the billions. There's many other storied regiments out there, including the Stoic Mordians and the fancy-hatted Vostroyan Firstborn, the industrial-efficient Armageddon Steel Legion, and the grim Valhallan Ice Warriors. Unfortunately their metal range is pulled from sale. I guess if you're collecting Imperial Guardsmen right now, then from Games Workshop it's Cadians, Catachans or Death Corps. I mean, what else are you going to do? Talking of poor fallen heroes though, it would be rude to do a guide to the Imperial Guard without mention of Commissar Yarrick, the hero of Hades' Hive, and an officer who's not afraid to take the fight to the front line, to the extent where he's happy to beat an orc war boss to death, rip off his power claw, and then to go on to use it to cut a bloody tally through the rest of the greenskins. Such is the impression that Yarrick is said to have made on the boys that some suspect that he may in part be made stronger by the greenskins' latent psychic abilities. They believe that old Bale Eye is so dangerous, so in fact he truly is. It was a sad day recently when the Commissar disappeared from the model range and was declared missing in action. Though if someone spreads the rumour that Angron may have done it to Ghazghkull, at least we get to set up a good fight between 2 of 40k's most angry violent maniacs. Overall though, the Imperial Guard are just an awesome Warhammer 40k army. A bunch of actual normal mortal people who get the job done because the man in the fancy hat tells them to do something impossible, and with lasgun and bayonets they will certainly do the job or die trying. To be honest though, they may have some of the most powerful forces in all of Warhammer 40k. Harnessing the memes to full potential, if we just take one guardsman with the ultimate faith in the Emperor, an angry Kriegsman with a shovel, and the man, the myth and the legend that is Sly Marbo, have Mr. Krieg hide them somewhere unexpected behind the nearest pot plant, and then instill them all with the kind of motivation that you only get once a commissar is kind of looking at you funny with a bolt pistol in hand. Can't imagine many groups in Warhammer 40k getting in the way of that and living. Of course though, that's just the loyalist side of the Astra Militarum. After all, why not fall to chaos, cover your armour in spikes, and spill a bit of blood in the name of the Dark Gods? It can be a fun and different way to collect a Warhammer 40k collection, and oh no, here's the Commissar, I better